Hello everyone and welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Josh, joined as ever by Rich Hudson.
Hello.
Because although earlier in the week we had a big blowout about the PS5, about how good it sounds, about that cool new controller, there is one tidbit hidden within all of that information that doesn't actually sound all that good, and that's the fact that backwards compatibility between the PS5 and the PS4 isn't actually a guarantee like we thought it was going to be.
No.
Rich, this would absolutely suck, but this comes from an interview with Famitsu, which has been translated, so, you know, there is some leeway on, you know, the actual wording of this interview. But the idea is someone from Sony Interactive was talking about the PS5 and had this to say. The dev team is putting all power on verifying whether they can secure a complete compatibility. Please wait for more information, which absolutely suggests that they're currently not there with total backwards compatibility for the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 5, and what we all think, which is that it's going to be backwards compatible with all consoles, that is starting to look more and more unlikely, and this would be obviously a huge shame. And Rich, my question to you and everyone at home is, if the PS5 didn't have total backwards compatibility with at least the PlayStation 4, would that impact your chances of actually buying the console?
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
I love the idea of the PlayStation 5 being completely backwards compatible, the idea that I can just get rid of my PS4, as sad as that would be.
Yeah.
I can be like, yeah, okay, you're done, don't need you anymore, don't need to keep you plugged in. I can just use my PS5 and everything will work perfectly fine.
Some space under the TV.
Yeah, because obviously going into this gen, this was the first time that into 8th gen, the first time that backwards compatibility wasn't a thing out the gate.
Yes.
So you kind of had to keep all of your old stuff if you could, of course, unless you had to trade it in to buy the new system. So the idea of being able to get rid of that, it's a very new thing for me to be able to be able to just get rid of the old system and keep the new one.
Yeah,
to play everything.
It's obviously at the start of the last generation, the idea of backwards compatibility almost seemed kind of antiquated and old. All of the big publishers and console makers were telling us that, you know,
no one cares.
It doesn't really
Nobody
matter.
wants
Nobody
it.
wants it. You can just keep your old console. And while that's true, it's not really sort of, you know, feasible when you're trying to convince someone to buy new hardware, especially in this generation, I think, especially because we've had those mid-console refreshes that have given us the Xbox One X and the PlayStation 4 Pro, to now ask us to buy another console and then to say, oh, by the way, all your old games, you know, you're gonna have to just play those on the other console. It doesn't really incentivize you to go out and put the money down for that next machine, but it does seem like they're actually trying to make it backwards compatible, and I do think they will achieve it, but it's interesting that they're not at the point now, a year away from launch, where it's completely locked in, considering a few months ago, and we'll get to this in a second, we had wild dreams about PlayStation 1 games, PlayStation 2 games, PlayStation 3 games, all being playable on this new console. Yeah.
You see, the problem with that is the fact that unlike PCs, as I always bring up when I'm on the news, because the hardware in the grand scheme of things hasn't really changed. The way the architecture works, it's just things get more powerful. Things do change bits and bobs, but the base format of a PC is always there. Hence why, as the meme suggests, why is there no PC 2?
Yep.
Because it doesn't need to be one. I can be playing games from the 1990s. I can play Doom from 1993, which boots via DOS
and I
on
can't
Windows
even
10.
play the original Last of Us on the PlayStation 4, Rich. I need to buy the remastered edition.
Exactly. But the problem is, back then, all of those systems, they had different architectures. The PS3 was notoriously bad to program for. So much so, companies like Valve, when they released the Orange Box, they got EA to port it to the PS3 because Valve just didn't know how. So to get all of this running under one framework is going to be very, very tough. So the fact that as much as the PS4 was a lot better for programmers, because obviously that PS3 slog that we had back in 2006, 2007 isn't there for the PS4. It still shows that what they're going for with the PS5, which from what we've heard with AMD and Ryzen and stuff, is going to be more like a PC, which is going to be a great thing for them. Getting the PS4 working on that hardware is gonna be hard.
Well, that's it. I mean, this is, again, the company, lest we forget, who took almost, or maybe even more than a decade to let you change your screen name. These things are very, very difficult on a kind of, you know, engineering front. And I do think, like what you said there, the past sort of, you know, processors and hardware that's being used for these consoles should allow a more natural transition between the PS4 and the PS5, because they're kind of based on like the
it wouldn't be as big of a jump as it was between the 3 and the 4.
Yes, which is the big sticking point. But I went back to read the original Wired article, which revealed the PlayStation 5 before it was even called the PlayStation 5, and that write-up said, quote, "Because it's based in part on the PS4's architecture, it would also be backwards compatible with games for that console. As in many other generational transitions, this would be a gentle one with numerous new games being released for both the PS4 and the next-gen console." So obviously this means, to me at least, if they don't get full backwards compatibility with the PS4 games, at least the new ones like Death Stranding or The Last of Us 2 or Ghost of Tsushima, those big exclusives that will sort of ride the line between this gen and next gen will at least be secured for the PlayStation 5, and you would assume better versions would also be present for that new machine.
I mean, to be honest, like having stuff being rolled out over time is how the Xbox side have had that since they first announced backwards compatibility in, what was it, 2016 or something like that?
Yes, I think it was that.
That's how it's always been. They get X number of games released every so often because there will be things that need tweaking. And if that seems to be what the main problem is with this backwards compatibility problem with the PS5, it's not that it doesn't work, it's that it doesn't work with everything yet. What specifically are the things that are making games incompatible with the PS5 hardware, we actually don't know. But that's not anything new. When you go back to look at something like the Game Boy Advance that had backwards compatibility with the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy, even though, interestingly, the Color is regarded as a mid-step, not a whole new console by Nintendo, which I find really strange. Anyway, out of all of the thousands of games produced for the Game Boy Color, not all of them actually do work on the Game Boy Advance. There are a handful that just don't.
I didn't know this. That's interesting. I wonder
you would just assume they would work.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
You would just assume they would work,
especially,
but they don't.
It's hard enough, me as a dumb 24-year-old, to get my head around sort of, the engineering front of this. So imagine me as an even dumber 14-year-old not understanding why one game doesn't work on, a next console, why another one does. It's quite tricky, but this does sort of link into that pattern that I mentioned earlier, which would essentially transform the PlayStation 5 into a legacy console, and it essentially puts a bunch of different processors in the PlayStation 5 console that account for each generation of PlayStation that will trick the hardware into thinking that it's playing natively off whatever game you put in, whether it's a PS2 game or a PS3 game. That, to me, sounds fantastical, and as always, all patents, that are filed, they all don't become consumer products, they all don't end up in consumer products, so this might just be wishful thinking on Sony's part, but I do think it makes it very evident that they are working, hard on trying to make this reality. Whether or not they achieve it by next year, whether it ends up being implemented after the fact, like you said, Xbox did, and Microsoft did with Xbox, that could be reality, but the fact of the matter is, that might not all be there at launch.
But at the end of the day, the Xbox progression of their systems, they obviously, the direct Xbox, which is what it was back in, 04 maybe, when they started producing it. So. It's literally just a PC, so they had that freedom to be able to do stuff. That's why companies were finding the Xbox 360 so much easier to program for, because it is literally just a PC. PS4, if you haven't had that case. But yeah, putting all the chips on the board for the PS5, you have the PS5 chip, the PS4 chip, a PS3, and then you just need like the Emotion Engine, because obviously the PS2 was backwards compatible with the PS1, basically no problem. Having all of that there and tricking it into thinking it's another system, I'm pretty certain that's been done before on a console. And I can't think of what it is that did it, but I'm almost certain that is the case before. But this idea isn't actually anything new either, going back to Nintendo and the Game Boy. Have you heard, I'm sure you have, the Super Game Boy for the Super Nintendo?
I haven't, Rich.
You haven't?
No, I haven't. No.
So basically it was a cartridge with a Game Boy slot in the front, so you could play Game Boy or Game Boy Color games on your TV through your Super Nintendo.
Oh, okay.
And it got very, very popular. They didn't actually do another one. The second variation of that was the Game Boy Advance thing for the GameCube with the plot on the bottom of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, back then, the Super Nintendo had no means of actually emulating the Game Boy itself. So instead, without the buttons on the screen, the Super Game Boy cartridge was a Game Boy.
Right.
Just plugged in the top.
That's fascinating.
And you basically played a Game Boy game through a Game Boy cartridge through a Super Nintendo into the TV. So the idea of just like tricking the system into thinking it's something else and just having the hardware there to play the game, that's not anything new.
That is a crazy workaround.
I didn't realise you didn't know that.
No, I had no idea that was even a thing. I'm not going to lie, I'm lacking when it comes to my Game Boy knowledge, I must say. I had an Advance and that was about it. But yeah, that sounds really cool. So the idea that, we can trick consoles isn't anything new, like you said. Hopefully Sony will be able to make a more elegant way of doing that with the PS5. But the biggest sticker for me me is, what happens with PlayStation Now? This is a service that has just got a big overhaul. It's got a new price point. It's got a bunch of new games being added. It's gotten a big push from a marketing perspective.
Yeah.
And this was always originally the solution Sony had for backwards compatibility. It was going to let you stream games, stream emulated games from across a bunch of different generations onto whatever console you were playing, and that was their solution. That obviously went a little bit skewed when Microsoft just went, well, our Xbox is now backwards compatible, so, suck it. But I do feel like, now we're entering an era of, subscription services and streaming. This could be their solution, at least in the short term, because I don't think it would impact them too much having both, dedicated hardware backwards compatibility while also having the option for PlayStation Now. But this does seem the subscription service seems more like an easy solution, at least from a.
At the end of the day, obviously, because PlayStation Now is more like Game Pass, they're going in that direction. That ticks a very different box to just blunt backwards compatibility. Because the thing about backwards compatibility is you need those old games.
Yes.
And if you don't have them, sometimes they're not that easy to come by. Like in the secondhand market, it fluctuates like anything. Sometimes it's very, very hard to find a particular game, and if you do find it, then you'll be finding it for ridiculous prices. If you're looking at like CEX in the UK, they fluctuate all over the place. eBay, of course, there is the inherent fear of, is this actually going to work? Is somebody going to try and scam me, or will this just not work?
Yeah.
So the subscription service with the backwards compatible side alongside genuine backwards compatibility, I don't think they will clash as much as you'd think. I think they will cater to two different people. If you've still got a bunch of PS1 and PS2 games, like I have, and I'm sure you probably do, you're okay. But if you don't, there is that option to be able to stream them, or even they just put them on the store again. At the end of the day, as much as like lots of ROM sites have been taken down over the last sort of year or two, Sony surely will have like all of their ROMs. They will have like master copies of all of their old games available, or even companies will still have that, so they could put. If they released like a classic store on the PlayStation 5, they would make a killing.
Well, I don't know why this hasn't kind of already happened with the PlayStation 4. We've had a smattering of PlayStation 2 games that have been released on there with kind of, upscaled resolutions and trophy support. But it's been a handful, and Sony has such a great library of, not only exclusive games, but games you associate with the console that aren't necessarily exclusive, that it just kind of feels like a waste to let all that history go. But hopefully the PS5 with PlayStation Now, and hopefully backwards compatibility, should they be able to figure it out, will sort this situation. But I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are you looking forward to the PlayStation 5, or will backwards compatibility not happening be a real kicker in your decision to buy it? Either way, while you're down there, can you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. And if you don't though, I've been Josh.
I've been Rich.
And we'll see you soon. Bye.